high above the skies of Canada, at more than 12,000 meters, a brand new Boeing 767 suddenly fell silent. Inside the cockpit, the two pilots could only look at each other. Their jet, carrying 69 souls, was now nothing more than a giant glider weighing over 80 tons. No fuel, no engines, and the only possible landing site, an abandoned Air Force base. But what made it worse, right beneath that runway, a car race was taking place, with hundreds of people on the ground. What happened next defied every rule of aviation and turned Air Canada Flight 143 into a legend, the Gimli Glider, the plane that flew without fuel. On July 23, 1983, in Canada, the world of aviation was stepping into a new era. Canada had just transitioned to the metric system of measurement, and this detail is crucial for today's story, because this change hit a disaster waiting to happen. The aircraft preparing for Air Canada Flight 143 was a Boeing 767-200, a modern jet only 5 months old, registered as CDUN. It was one of the first Air Canada planes equipped with the advanced glass cockpit technology. The cockpit was manned by two highly experienced pilots. Captain Robert Bob Pearson, 48, a veteran pilot with over 15,000 flight hours. Calm, sharp, and composed, he also had extensive glider flying experience, a skill that would later prove to be life-saving. First Officer Maurice Quintal, 36. Intelligent, analytical, and deeply knowledgeable about mathematics and aircraft systems, with more than 7,000 flight hours. Both were respected professionals, but they were about to face a completely unprecedented systems failure. The flight was scheduled to depart from Montreal, Quebec, make a short stop in Ottawa, and then continue to its final destination in Edmonton, Alberta. It was an ordinary domestic afternoon flight. On board the Boeing 767 were 61 passengers and 8 crew members, ordinary Canadians traveling for business, leisure, or simply returning home. None of them knew they were about to become witnesses and central figures in one of the most extraordinary survival stories in aviation history. Everything was ready for a safe and smooth journey. But a tiny, silent mistake made during preparation was about to turn this flight into a potential catastrophe. Before departure, refueling took place in Montreal. It was there that a critical mix-up between two measurement systems quietly planted the seed of disaster. The Boeing 767 was the first Air Canada aircraft to use the new metric-based fuel measurement system, kilograms instead of the traditional pounds. However, the ground crew was still using older fuel gauges, which read only in pounds. The flight crew calculated that they would need a total of 22,300 kilograms of fuel to complete the journey. Step 1. Calculate the required mass. 22,300 kilograms was the total amount of fuel needed. Step 2. Convert mass to volume. This required knowing the fuel density. First Officer Quintal determined that the aircraft currently had 7,682 liters of fuel on board. He then needed to convert that volume into mass by multiplying it by the fuel's density. He performed the calculation as follows. 7,682 liters, incorrect density value, is almost equal to 13,560 pounds of fuel. And this is where the problem began. The ground crew, still accustomed to the old system, continued to work in pounds instead of kilograms. At this stage, the refueling process required converting the 6,150 kilograms of fuel already on board into pounds, so the ground crew could determine how many more pounds of fuel to add. However, because the new metric procedures were not yet clearly understood, the ground crew mistakenly assumed that the 7,682 liters of fuel already on board was equal to 7,682 kilograms, when in fact, it should have been 6,150 kilograms. Then came an even more fatal misunderstanding. The ground crew looked at the fuel gauge saw the number 7,682 and thought it represented kilograms rather than pounds. They then converted 7,682 kilograms into pounds, which of course produced a much higher number. After a series of these compounding errors, the flight crew was led to believe that the aircraft now carried 22,300 kilograms, 49,160 pounds, of fuel. The painful reality was far different. The aircraft actually had only 7,682 liters of fuel, about 6,150 kilograms, or 13,560 pounds, less than half of what was needed for flight. With the incorrect fuel data entered into the cockpit computer, the Boeing 767 lifted off and climbed into the night sky, a routine, uneventful flight. At least on the surface, the crew was confident. Every system appeared to be working perfectly. They had no idea that they were flying on a ticking time bomb, not one made of explosives, but of empty fuel tanks slowly running dry. Flight 143 cruised smoothly at 41,000 feet, about 12,500 meters, as it approached Red Lake, Ontario. The crew was relaxed, chatting casually, enjoying the quiet hum of the aircraft. But that calm was about to be shattered. At 12,500 meters above the Canadian sky, Captain Bob Pearson was enjoying the steady performance of the brand new Boeing 767. After more than an hour of flight, everything seemed perfect until 8:10 p.m. local time. A sharp, piercing warning chime suddenly echoed through the cockpit. On the sophisticated central warning panel, a message flashed: left engine fuel pressure low. The pilots, momentarily puzzled, suspected a faulty sensor. Following standard procedures, they shut off the fuel pumps to the affected wing and switched on the backup pumps, attempting to restore pressure. They radioed air traffic control to report a fuel pressure problem and decided to divert to Winnipeg as a precaution, still confident that they had plenty of fuel remaining. 8:20 p.m. A louder, more urgent alarm erupted. The left engine had completely shut down. The once brilliant displays in the cockpit went dark, replaced by an eerie silence as the mighty Rolls-Royce engine wound down to a stop. Captain Bob Pearson immediately began the emergency restart procedures, but nothing worked. The aircraft's thrust had been cut in half. Just 30 seconds later, a cold metallic click echoed from the right side. Another warning sounded, and then silence. The right engine had failed. In an instant, the entire Boeing 767, a multi-million-dollar marvel of modern aviation, had become nothing more than a gigantic glider with no thrust whatsoever. All primary flight displays, including the advanced ICA system, went dead. The cockpit was bathed in the dim glow of backup instruments, while an almost perfect silence filled the air, broken only by the howl of the wind rushing past fuselage. First Officer Maurice Quintal acted quickly. He grabbed his notebook and began calculating, relying on his strong background in mathematics. He radioed air traffic control. What's the distance to Winnipeg? The answer came back, 100 miles. He noted their current altitude, 26,000 feet, about 7,900 meters, and began to estimate their glide ratio. Quintal calculated that the Boeing 767 could glide at roughly 12 to 1, meaning it would travel 12 miles forward for every 1 mile it descended. At that altitude, it was clear they wouldn't make it to Winnipeg. That's when Captain Pearson remembered Gimli, a former Royal Canadian Air Force base not far from their position. He had once served there. But there was a problem. Gimli had been decommissioned, and more importantly, it had no active landing systems. Even worse, Pearson had no idea that part of the runway had been converted into a car racing track, and that a family racing event was taking place right at that moment. Taking control, Pearson drew upon his experience as a glider pilot. He began performing S-turns, a zigzag maneuver, to bleed off altitude and line up with the Gimli runway. A new issue arose. Without engine power, the hydraulic systems that moved the control surfaces, the ailerons, rudder, and flaps, had also shut down. Fortunately, The 767 was equipped with ram air turbine RAT, a small wind-driven generator that automatically deploys when both engines fail. As it spun in the rushing air, the RAT provided just enough hydraulic and electrical power to give the pilots basic control of the aircraft. Now, the massive Boeing 767, stripped of all power, had become a silent giant glider, descending toward Gimli and whatever waited on the ground below. As the massive Boeing 767 approached Gimli Airfield, one final, terrifying problem became clear. They were too high. If they came in too fast, the aircraft would shatter on impact. Relying on his instincts as a glider pilot, Captain Bob Pearson executed a maneuver so daring and so unconventional that it had never been taught in commercial jet training. The side slip, also known as a forward slip. He rolled the aircraft steeply to one side, using the rudder and ailerons in opposite directions to create massive aerodynamic drag. The jet began to lose altitude rapidly without gaining dangerous speed, a maneuver typically reserved for light gliders, not for a 130-ton airliner. Inside the cabin, panic gave way to stunned silence. The flight attendants prepared the passengers for an emergency landing. Moments later, the aircraft touched down. Captain Pearson tried to deploy the landing gear. The main gear locked into place, but the nose gear failed due to the weak hydraulic pressure supplied only by the RAT. A horrific screech tore through the air as the nose of the jet slammed onto the runway, the metal belly scraping against the concrete, showering sparks as the aircraft skidded down the strip. And then a miracle. That friction, instead of destroying the jet, helped slow it down. The giant airliner finally came to a stop. Just a few yards from the crowd gathered for a local car race that was taking place on the same runway. All 69 people on board survived. Only a few suffered minor injuries while sliding down the evacuation chutes. The incredible landing of Air Canada Flight 143 would forever be remembered as the story of the Gimli Glider, a testament to calm leadership, quick thinking, and the extraordinary skill of two pilots who turned a powerless jet into a miracle glider. Technical analysis and root cause. The Transportation Safety Board Canada, TSB, conducted an investigation and identified the primary cause as a fuel miscalculation, unit system error, systemic error. The core issue was a confusion between kilograms metric system and pounds imperial system. Ground crew calculated the required fuel in pounds, but mistakenly assumed it was kilograms. Procedural shortcomings. Air Canada lacked clear, verified procedures for converting between measurement systems, particularly cross-checking fuel calculations between ground technicians and the flight crew. Faulty warning systems. The Fuel Quantity Indication System, FQIS, on the 767 had malfunctioned prior to flight, yet the aircraft was still clear to fly. The pilots had to rely on manual calculations, which unfortunately were incorrect